Welcome to the Intentional Man Podcast, a podcast that inspires and equips men to lead lives of intentionality and grow to their full potential. I'm your host, Jonathan McGinley, a life coach that helps men just like you create the life that you want and live a story of significance through my coaching and tools on intentionality. Thanks for joining, and welcome to the show. Hello, welcome to the show. I am so excited for today. You are in for a treat. I got my good friend Dustin West on the call with us today, and he is a senior wealth advisor and strategist at Accelerated Wealth. He's one of the three owners there as well. An amazing company that helps people with finances to experience financial freedom and to plan for retirement and just kind of have their finances thriving and in order. So, Dustin, thanks for being a part of the show and welcome.
Man, it's so good to be here with you, Jonathan. Thanks for the opportunity, buddy.
Yeah, so excited. So I know Dustin is going to provide a lot of value to you in the area of finances. He's been a huge inspiration to me and help to me and my family and a lot of others I know. And he's very passionate about this. So I'm just excited to pick your brain. I'm here to learn right alongside all of you and just to kind of soak up all the wisdom and knowledge that he shares with us. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Dustin, I'm just curious to just get kind of a glimpse into your story with money. Was this kind of something you were always passionate about?
Yeah, it was. Early on, I think growing up in a home that was pretty dysfunctional with money, I think the more I deal in this world of finances, the more you get to hear people's story. I was like a lot of you maybe out there that grew up where fear kind of dictated a lot of how our family grew up with money. And so those are a lot of the emotions and a lot of the feelings that I think about when I think about money growing up. And so I always remember as kind of the firstborn paying attention throughout my childhood, like, okay, I really don't like how that was done. Okay, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So always kind of trying to be mindful of that. And then as I got older, always having a passion for saving and trying to dictate a different future than what I grew up with. And so yeah, I've always been very passionate about it for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. So kind of started from your childhood feeling, I guess, the anxiety or the stress of a lack of money.
Yeah,
So yeah, did that kind of carry on into as you got older, like you were feeling that weight still?
it did. What a good question, because I've been married 22 years to my amazing wife, and she's kind of had to deal with a lot of the scars of the things I brought into our marriage, kind of unknowingly, things that I
Mm,
brought in, that fear-based mindset. And for those of you who are listening out there, I might encourage you to do this if you're driving or wherever you're at, is just stop and kind of close your eyes and think about the one emotion that you had growing up in your home as it relates to finances. And most of the time when I ask clients this, they can come up with it like in a second. Usually there's two or three emotions, but stop and think about the one emotion. And as I've tried to delay to give you time to think about it, I will tell you very quickly, when I thought about that exercise years ago, the number one emotion that dictated how I saw money was fear. It was
mm,
lack. It was this constraint and this emotion of poverty and fear. Even though we weren't in poverty, we lived with
mhm.
this overwhelming sense of fear. And so I get married to my amazing sweetheart, who's the most giving person that I know. And anybody guess what her number one emotion was growing up in her home with money? Jonathan, any guess?
Man, if she's generous, it have to be joy and giving and
Yeah. So
abundance. Yeah.
before I could even finish the question, she just said, fun. Money's fun. And I thought that just describes so much of our disconnect in
A
marriage for
little
the first
different.
10
Yep.
years. You have a guy who grew up with fear, and you have a lady who grew up thinking money is supposed to be fun and enjoyed and given whenever you get it. So to answer your question, it absolutely dictated a lot of our marriage, especially the early years of our marriage.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. uh, just the two different approaches there. When did
Absolutely.
so like take me back to the beginning of your marriage. So you got
Yeah.
somebody bringing that in. This money is fun, and then somebody bringing it in with fear. How did that kind of play out for you guys, kind of in a practical way?
Yeah, I wish I could give you the really good Christian response that, God reigned in it all and I handled it really maturely and led well, but that wasn't the case. I think I led out of fear a lot. And quite frankly, it
Mm,
kind of strangled my wife emotionally, because she's the most giving person that I know. She wants to be free with her money. She lives with her money that comes into her hands as her hands are wide open. She's not clenching it. And
yeah,
so I admire that. But when it comes to me and all the money that would come in our first 10 years of marriage, it was extremely challenging because now I'm being called out by the woman I love to handle it differently. So I just wasn't equipped to do it, quite frankly. But I will say
wow,
that her prayers and her grace, she wouldn't nag me. She would pray. And after about 11 years, God finally got a hold of my heart and I think blew open the windows of heaven as it relates to
yeah,
our finances. But it was in large part due to her grace and her prayers for me and our family.
wow, wow. That's amazing, and just so yeah, beautiful of just the patience and everything,
Yeah,
and yeah, I mean, just so and I know when you first said it, you're growing up with fear, you're learning to save. I think that's a tricky part, right? Because you're like, I want to be
yeah,
responsible with my finances, I want to
right.
save, I want to
Yeah,
plan, and so you're coming at it with that approach. So how did
yeah.
that kind of, what was the tension there of I want to lead in terms of my savings, but I also want to end up being a little more generous and giving because that's what my wife, that's how she sees money.
Sure. Yeah, really good question. I think, if I were to boil this down for those of you who maybe are driving or just listening and are taking notes, there's really four things you can do with your money. You can save it, you can invest it, you can give it, or you can spend it. That's
Mm,
essentially kind of the
yeah.
four buckets of what you can do with your money. And for those of you who are younger out there, I'm thinking, late teens, early 20s, maybe even early 30s. I can say that as a 45-year-old, you're young to me. That, I think the biggest mistake I made growing up, besides the piece we've already talked about, living more out of fear, is I saved too much. Right now, interest rates are really low. So, for those of you who are trying to get traction and you're living out of fear and you're just doing what I did growing up, I had a bunch of jobs growing up and I would just save money. Well, right now, with inflation at 10 to 12%, if you're earning 1% on your money, you're literally losing, you're guaranteed to lose 10% per year to
Mm,
purchasing power. So it might make you feel good to save money, but really mathematically, you're losing money. You're losing purchasing power. So I guess one of my practical tips would be don't save as much, invest and give more. And that was
wow.
one of the biggest mistakes I made early on, even before I was married, is out of fear. I'm saving to see my bank account grow, but I wasn't
Hmm.
investing in stocks, wasn't investing in equities, which I should have been. And I
Yeah.
wasn't as giving as I should have been as well.
Mm. No, that's really good, man. That's really good. I would be curious. So kind of you mentioned about 11 years into your marriage and things kind of flipped for you. Just take me back to that moment. What was it kind of that happened at that changed your mindset a little bit towards money?
Boy, how long do you have? Because I could take a half an hour on this one alone. I'll try to be brief because I'm really passionate about it. I feel like for the guys out there that are listening that are kind of trying to run their finances in their own strength, out of their own will, out of their own might and willpower, I played that game. I lived that life. I managed the checkbook better than anybody. I tried to dictate my finances. I tried to create wealth and and honor God, but really I was the one who was dictating my finances, if I'm being honest, for the first 10, 11 years of our marriage. And I know what kind of dead end that led to, so I can speak to that with a different kind of authority because I've lived that life. Along that 10 years, I led a lot of Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University courses. So for those of you who don't know, it's about a 13-week course, often through churches where you pay $89 to $129. You have a lifetime membership to any course in the country forever. So that's pretty cool. And the statistics are on it. If you walk through that 13 weeks, you're likely to pay off about $5,000, or I'm sorry, you're likely to pay off $3,000 of debt in that 13 weeks, and on average save about 4 to 5,000. So that's like a $7,000 to $8,000 swing in your
Mm,
finances in just 13 weeks. It's pretty crazy.
Wow.
So I led that. And when I say led that, Dave's doing the teaching, but I'm leading the before and the after and trying to help hold couples accountable to live this stuff out and actually get traction. And so it became very, very challenging for me, Jonathan, where I'm leading these courses and I'm hearing the messages on tithing and I'm hearing the messages about God is in control of your finances. And I just could no longer take the disconnect internally that I lived
Wow.
most of this stuff correctly, but I could not look myself in the mirror and say that I'm actually a giving person and I'm trusting God with the tithe, which he commands in Matthew 3. And also, I remember after almost every course, I would have multiple women come up to me. It was never the guy. And this is over
Mm.
several years. Ages 20, they've been married 1 year, or 30 or 40, they've been married 20 years, or even late in their 60s. And women are coming up, tearing up, crying. Can you pray for me and my husband? What should I say to my husband? And in every case, it was the husband holding back the marriage. It was the husband holding
Mm.
back the wife. She wanted to
Wow.
give more and she wanted to live more. But according to
Wow.
her, again, 20 years old to 60, didn't matter. She felt like her husband wasn't leading well and was living out of this fear, poverty mindset, and it was strangling her. It was choking her. And she didn't know what to do about it. So I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack, but I had enough of those conversations where I started to really think, what is the Lord doing in my heart, and what is my wife feeling? And I remember at
Mhm.
one of those times I went to my wife and she teared up as well. And she said, unfortunately, she was feeling a lot of what those other women were saying. And I thought, my goodness, how humbling that I'm leading these courses and I'm not even leading my family well. And I'm not
Wow.
letting God reign in my finances well. And so from that moment, kind of dictated the rest of our future. And we started living differently by at that time.
That is a powerful story, man. Wow.
Yeah.
So powerful. And just so eye-opening, I think, for a lot of guys, because I think we hear this, hey, you're the money maker. You're supposed to provide for your family. You're supposed to be in charge of the finances. And so even to me, as I'm hearing that, I'm like, the temptation is no doubt to hold on to your finances
Yeah.
because you've worked so hard for it. And we have so much pride attached, right, to how we're providing for the family and how we're making
Right.
money. And so it's like it has this tendency where we just grab it and hold on to it and just say, I want to protect this.
Yes.
Um, and I think, you're thinking that you're, doing that out of, you're providing well for your family and you're saving and you're doing this for your family, but what's crazy is what you're saying is that a lot of the women are feeling like that is actually, you know, putting a stranglehold on the family and is not leading well,
Yeah.
when we may think it is leading well, but it's actually not. So what would you say to a guy who's feeling that pressure of like, I got this money, I've worked so hard for it, I'm trying to hold on to it because I'm trying to, with good intentions, I'm trying to provide for my
Yeah.
family. Um, kind of, yeah. What would you say in that case? After
You bring
talking
up
to all
such a
these
good
women.
point, and a lot of times at our firm at Accelerated Wealth, we talk about the difference between intent and execution. So
Mm,
what you just mentioned is, hey, my intent is good. I want to provide for our family, and we know what the word says about men who don't provide for their families. And so, gosh, how do I try to provide for my family and have a good intent, but also have a good execution?
right.
And at least in my story, I felt like my intent was good, but what I did was literally limit what the Lord could do in our finances. And so, because I was trying to create all of this financial freedom by my own strength, it felt like what you just said. It felt like it was all on me. My
Mm,
wife wasn't even included in a lot of it. I mean, I would say she was, but at the end of the day, it was like it all stopped with me. So the pressure and the weight of that, it just wasn't sustainable. And I think, quite frankly, for the listeners who are believers out there, it's not intended to all be on your shoulders. If you think that you're the creator and the owner of the finances in your family, I can predict that you're going to be way more stressed with money than you should be. And God is not calling you to carry that cross. So the first and maybe the last thing I would say is for those of you who are feeling stressed with money, who are feeling the weight, and your intent is good, your heart is good.
Hmm.
When you're at church and you're talking to a guy over coffee about your finances, you sound good, but your execution isn't good. So please hear my heart on that. Your intent is good, but your execution isn't. And I think that at least for me, when I that 2011, when my intent was good, my execution stunk. I was
Mm,
dealing strictly out of earthly math, and there was no room for the Lord to do his work supernaturally in our finances. And it wasn't until I gave up
wow.
control and started to tithe faithfully that the windows of heaven blew open in my finances and, quite frankly, in my heart.
That is so good, man. That is so good. Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing. Because I think,
Now, can I just add that it sounds good,
yes.
Jonathan, and I appreciate that. But for those of you who are out there, I think we need to spend some time on just how difficult that
Mm,
transition was for me. It wasn't like I
yeah.
heard from the
Yeah.
Lord, the angels were singing, and I'm skipping into church writing tithe checks. There
Yeah.
was a death that occurred, and
Wow.
there were multiple deaths that occurred. And I'm using that word very, very strategically because there were parts of my heart that I had clung to at that time for multiple decades. That fear, I've got to create everything in my own strength. So when I decided to tithe in Jesus' name and trust his word, that's the only time in the entire scripture that the Father of the universe challenges us to test him and see if he won't blow open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing for us that we can't even contain. That's the only time he challenges us to test him. And so, literally, I had to figuratively and literally die to myself and everything that was built up in my heart to then experience that promise of what he offered to me. So I just want to make sure to connect with people who are out there thinking like, you don't know how hard it is for me. You haven't lived my walk. Trust
Hmm.
me, I know the death that occurs to take that leap.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Just a powerful story. And I think what you said about intentions and execution is crucial. And I think, when we talk about on this show, it's the Intentional Man podcast. I think
Yeah,
so many times, and this was the story in my life, like I've had so many good intentions in my life. I've wanted to be a good person. I've wanted to love people. I've wanted to serve. I want to be generous.
yeah,
Those are truly the desires of my heart. But so many times, if that doesn't line up with your actions, if that doesn't line out with what's actually the result, um, then it's kind of empty, right? It's
yeah,
like we can be
yeah,
good intentioned people and the execution can be off, and that's not a reflection that I'm a bad person. It just means that, oh, I need to get more intentional with my finances. I need to actually have more of a plan with my finances. I need to
yeah,
think through. I need to bring my wife in on my finances, like
yeah,
that's being intentional with them instead of, and I think it can be so personal sometimes where I feel like, oh, man, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do well. She doesn't understand. People
yeah,
don't understand. I'm working my butt off. I'm trying to make money, like, and those are all good. Like I affirm that is a good passion
yeah,
and a pursuit.
right.
But the execution and being humble enough to step back and say, okay, actually, we're not getting the results that we want. And I actually am realizing in my life now that I'm holding on, way too strongly to this.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that's such a good point. I think kind of the scoreboard test of just you and your quiet time, or however you have that, whether it's with the Lord or yourself, and you literally look at the scoreboard of your finances. And I'm not talking about your net worth. I'm talking about the emotion that you feel as it relates to money in your home. Is there more life? Is there more freedom? Or is there more death and
wow.
frustration? And when you look at it that way, I think that can really help give you a good litmus test. And you'll know the answer to that question very quickly. If it's not life and it's not freedom and it's not peace, then something's off there. Perhaps God's trying to get at your heart and trying to have you do it more his way and not your way.
Guys, I want to encourage you all to take time to do that. How important is that? And very rarely do we actually think about that of,
Mm,
what is my emotion with money? And
yeah.
and that one emotion is probably driving the majority of your decisions. And so I would challenge you to take time today. Maybe it's now, push pause,
Yeah,
and actually think about this and reflect on it. One of the most powerful things we can do as a man that we rarely do because we're such drivers is we rarely take time to stop and to reflect and to think. And so
yeah,
that would be my a huge takeaway from this. Take time today to figure out what that emotion is, because you may be in a place where you think, you have a good handle on your money, but if it is all fear, if it is all negative emotions, it's probably affecting the way that you're thinking about money more than you may anticipate. So I really
agreed.
appreciate that. I really appreciate that. So let's kind of shift and just talk really practical here. So let's just say that your emotion is fear, that your emotion is negative around money. What would you tell somebody in that spot to do, or what are some things to kind of start to shift that mindset where it can become a little more positive?
The biggest thing that I would encourage you to do, and there is one thing, by the way, is to start tithing today, to start taking that act of faith to trust that you are not the owner of your finances, that the creator of the heavens and earth is the owner of your finances, and you are merely a steward. Another
Mm,
way to think of steward is a manager. You are not the owner, you are the manager. And the best way to quench fear is to bring back 10% of all that you earn and bring it back to the Lord's house, i.e., the church. When you do that, that is the number one way that I've sensed, and I've seen it now for 13 years in my life, to quench fear. And it works. There's a reason why God has over 2,200. I'll say that again. He has over 2,200 scriptures in his word on money because he knows that that is so closely connected to our heart. So he knows that if he can get money right in our hearts, he can get to our heart. And tithing is the best way to do that.
yeah, that's great. That's great. And it sounds like from your story that was one of the things that broke it open for you, huh? After 11 years, that was
It
one of the
was, and I
things
think
that.
for the people listening out there, I never could get the math to work when I would run my budget. I was the nerd that had Excel spreadsheets from a long time ago, kind of dictating and, as you talked about, trying to control my finances and provide a better path for my family. And every month I ran the budget for the next month, and guess what I found? There wasn't enough money at the end of the month to tithe.
Yeah.
Well, what priority was I putting tithe? It was probably about eighth or ninth or 10th down on the list. So, of course, there wasn't enough money to tithe until I made it first. And I stopped using earthly math. And all of a sudden, God was able to take the 90 beyond the tithe and blow open the windows of heaven on that 90. And now no longer was I using earthly math, it was supernatural. Now he was glorified instead of me being glorified in my fear. And it was pretty amazing how quickly that was. I was stunned. He's laughing, of course, and you are too. I was stunned at how much he provided freedom and how quickly he provided it.
That is incredible. Wow, that's incredible. It's so opposite of what we usually think. You
Yeah,
know, give first and you will feel the freedom. Give first and you will
right.
experience financial
Yeah,
freedom.
hoard more. Just keep hoarding, and at some point you'll feel enough peace. It doesn't happen.
I
I meet with
know
those
that's
people. They have millions of dollars, and they're living out of more fear than maybe you are with, 100,000 in your bank account or less. So I've seen the other side, and that doesn't create more peace.
oh wow, that's amazing. I want to talk about I know we got a lot of single guys on this show, a lot of young married men on this show. I want to
Yeah.
talk about um I want to talk about the issue of debt and
Mm.
just and personal finances. And I think this is a huge thing. And a big thing that drives fear, obviously, if you don't really have these finances under control. So for somebody who's just like, Dustin, I hear you. I want to get this area under control. I don't want to live in fear anymore. Um, what are kind of the fundamentals of personal finance? What are the fundamentals at a basic level that you can put in place to kind of really start being intentional in this area?
Yeah. So I'm beating a dead horse intentionally, and then I'll get to your question. Even if you have a lot of debt, and when my wife and I got married, we had about $90,000 in debt, and we paid it off. Our goal was 7 years. We paid it off in 3 because we got crazy motivated to do it. So I've walked the path of having debt. tithe first, and then secondly, you want to start attacking that debt unlike anything you've ever attacked before to get freedom. And I think the biggest answer to your question, Jonathan, is in being intentional is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. So most people
Mm,
do a budget
mm.
and they look back. Hey, where did I spend money last month? And then they calculate it and they see the percentages and oh, here's where all my money went. What very few people do is look forward and say, here's where I'm going to spend my money this next month. Here's where I'm going to tithe. Here's where I'm going to give. Here's where I'm going to
That's
save.
good.
Here's what I'm going to spend my money on. So looking forward and telling your money where to go is very different than looking back and seeing where you spent it. Does that make sense?
Yep, that's very good, and that goes right in line with a lot of what we talked about on the show. We've thrown around the quote a lot of times: if if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And I
Yes.
think that's exactly what you're saying. You have to tell your money where to go. You have to plan the next month where it's going to go. We've all been in that situation where if
Yeah.
you don't have a game plan, if you don't have any kind of budget, you're going to make decisions on the fly in moments that are emotional, in moments that you may not be thinking the big picture. I'm just thinking about, you go out with friends and you're like, okay, I'm going to spend all this money on food. If I didn't think about where that was going before, I'm just going to do it. And then you get to the end of the month and you realize, okay, I didn't save any money. My debt
Yeah.
has actually grown or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's huge. Do you do you kind of put that budget together then on a monthly basis, like start of the month at a certain time you're looking forward and then you plan it all out? Just getting
We've
really
we've been
practical
doing it
there.
now for so long, probably I mean, probably about 15 years or a little more. So we've got it down now where it's more check-ins.
Hmm.
But, I would say the more debt you have and the lower amount of savings you have, so the more debt and the lower savings, I would say the more frequently you need to have those meetings, at least monthly. And then once you get traction and you're really dictating where your money's going, now it can be more check-ins, maybe quarterly.
Hmm.
The other thing that I think might be helpful for a lot of people out there, it's helpful for me. And before I give the answer, just know my heart on this. I love the topic of financial management more than just about anybody I meet. I'm not saying I'm
Yeah.
the best at it or the smartest at it, but I love it the most. I really, really, really enjoy it. And I still have a team of people around me to hold me accountable. So I have what I call a financial advisory board. I have my
Mm.
wife, who's the CEO, and I have
Yeah.
four other guys that are all different than me, that all think a little different, but all five of them are designed to hold me accountable to being the best steward that I can be. So if I'm getting emotional or I'm getting ready to make a decision that doesn't align with my values, that they can call me out. And I just had that happen this last year. I've been in the market for buying a truck and I'm an emotional wreck at this point. I need a team of people to come alongside me and hold me accountable to make sure I'm intentional with that purchase. And whether you have five or you have one or two, I think that might be really helpful for some of the listeners out there to get some people around you to hold you accountable for you.
Absolutely. That is fantastic. Yeah, I think that's huge. It's so and especially this area. I'm actually glad you brought that up because I think in especially this area, it's very personal, right? It's very
Mhm.
emotional. I feel like us as men, it's very rarely it's something we talk about, especially our shortcomings in this
Yeah.
area. Um, yeah, I think that's very hard to approach a friend and say I'm struggling financially. It's just for some reason that's one of the things that we just don't often do.
Agreed.
Um, and
Yeah.
I think that can cause so many problems because you're on an island by yourself, especially single guys too. It's just like there's nobody out there who's holding you accountable, and if you're not talking to anyone, there's nobody watching your finances, and so
Sure.
that is huge, man. A budget, but also bringing in a community of trusted people that can
Yeah.
kind of help you in this area, and it's not something that's to be embarrassed about, right?
Absolutely. Yes, to help you get traction and to help get you traction quicker. So, one of a couple of things I'd say, if four or five people on that financial advisory board are intimidating, maybe just start with one, your best buddy
Mm,
that you want to pull alongside and say, hey, man, I just want to be transparent and I just need some help here. And I'm coming to you for some accountability. Can you walk with me each month for the next, several months and help me get traction? The second thing is if that seems a little intimidating, I would say going to a Total Money Makeover event or Financial Peace University via
Hmm.
Dave Ramsey. I don't know of anybody better in motivating the average American to get debt free and to get traction with their finances. He's helped transform our family and our legacy going forward. And I've seen him do it with countless other people, including a lot of my clients. It's $89 to $129 the last I looked. And like I said, it's like a seven or $8,000 swing in 13 weeks. So it's a good ROI on your money. So you can't use that as an excuse.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I hear you say create a budget and do it for the
Yep.
month ahead.
Yep.
Make sure you're planning and telling your money where to go.
Yep.
Get a group of guys around you who can speak into your money. Also, bringing in your wife. Obviously, you said she's the CEO. So,
Yep.
married men, make sure your wife is very much a part of this.
Yes.
And then also, yeah, very practical is attending one of these courses, the Money Makeover, Financial Peace University. So, there's three things right there that you can start to do. Um, I want to talk about just the budget real quick. I know a lot of
Yeah.
guys um, don't want to do a budget because it feels very restrictive, because it feels like it's just too tedious or whatever. And it's a lot of, it takes time and planning and all that. So, can you talk into that mindset in terms of a fear mindset of if I have a budget, I have no spontaneity, I have no freedom with my money? Can you just talk about kind of how that's played out for you?
Yeah, I would say again, kind of looking at the scoreboard, is your finances creating more life and freedom and peace, or is it creating more death and restriction and frustration? If it's the latter, if it's more death and frustration and lack, then I would be thinking of one of my favorite quotes, which is, "If you want what you've never had, you have to be willing to do what you've never done." And
Yes,
so,
so
if
good.
all that you've done to this point has gotten you to that frustration and that death and that lack, well, then maybe now it's time to do something different. And speaking from experience, it was trying to literally throw a grenade in what I thought I knew of finances and blow all that up to
Mhm.
allow God to get in there to actually create some freedom. And I understand it's risky, it's challenging, it's scary, but and half an hour of intentionality at the beginning of a month can literally change your financial future. A 30-minute allocation to the month ahead of time. Think about how much time you spend on your phone looking at stupid stuff on articles. Or I'm not a Facebook or social media guy, never have been, but people spending time on YouTube or social media hours and hours and hours a week. I'm asking for 30 minutes of intentional time at the start of a month to change your financial future. I think it's worth it.
Men, please listen to what he just said. That is incredible. And that is what we talk about so often on this show. 30 minutes can take you from a fear mindset with money to a freedom mindset. Literally
Mm-hmm.
30 minutes of planning can take you from I have no clue where my money's going. I seem to every month I'm spending more than I'm saving, and it's causing all this stress. And we're talking about 30 minutes, you
Yeah.
sitting down and telling your money where it's going to go. And you're tracking that throughout the month so that then you have an idea. How much freedom does that actually bring? Like, we think a budget seems restriction, but everything that I just heard sounds like a lot of freedom to me, of a peace of mind of knowing, okay, this month I'm going to come out on top. I'm going to be able to save. I'm going to be able to give. I'm going to, all those things. And that's what I've found personally with a budget is actually incredibly freeing. If I have $100 where I'm saying I can spend this on entertainment or whatever it is, then I can go and do it, and I can, know that I still am sticking to the budget, and it's actually super freeing instead of in the back of my mind worrying, do I have the money to spend on this? Um, so that is amazing. 30 minutes can help bring freedom instead of fear or frustration. And so much of this is planning. So much of this is planning and actually taking the time to stop and be intentional with your finances. So good, Dustin. We've also talked about kind of how your finances are a great indicator of what is a priority in your life. I think like where our time is spent and where our money is spent
Yeah.
can pretty quickly show you where your priorities in life. So, can you talk about that of how your money can be a reflection of what is important to you and how to make sure that those two things align?
Yeah, I think we've all kind of heard of the checkbook test. I don't know if Dave Ramsey came up with that or not, but I think it's a really good indicator. It's a scary exercise. I remember when I was in the throes of this disconnect of how I was living versus how I felt I should be living. It wasn't fun to do a checkbook test of the last 90 days and literally chart how I've spent money. There was nothing in there forgiving. I think there might have been
Mm,
some terribly low amount, but it showed where my heart was. It showed what my priorities were, and the numbers really spoke pretty loudly to me as a person who's been obsessed with finances and now as a financial advisor. The numbers spoke very loudly about where my priorities were. So one, I would say do a checkbook test, or for those of you who don't even know what a checkbook is, uh, pull up your bank
yeah.
statement and look at your phone and check out where maybe year to date, where have you spent your money, break it out into categories and see what's important to you and see what that's creating in your life. The second one I think is doing the same thing with your time. I did this a few years ago, and I think we can constantly do this as much as our stinking phones are vying for our time and our affection and our heart is and I like this as much as a lot of people, right? Sports
Hmm.
guy, love checking
Yeah.
on here. It's a lazy thing to do. So I would say don't just do a checkbook test or a bank test, but do an inventory of your time. There's 24 hours in a day. Look back at or look forward at the next week and keep track of how you're spending every hour of this next week, and you'll start to see some things maybe that are good, and as far as what your priorities are and how they're matching up. But you'll also start to see some holes. Oh my gosh, I didn't spend 30 minutes on my finances and being intentional, but I spent 10 hours looking at social media. That needs to change. So I think both of those can be very helpful.
So helpful. So helpful. And just so practical. And I think, yeah, so important. Yeah, I appreciate everything that you're giving to us. This is amazing. This is great. I want to paint
Absolutely.
a good just a vision for these guys. We've been talking pretty practical here.
Yeah.
So I know I've heard you say this, I've seen you this on your bios and everything about you want to help people experience financial freedom. And that sounds awesome, as a man. And we've talked a lot about the negative mindsets, but financial freedom. What do you kind of think of when you think of financial freedom? What's that big vision? What's that picture that you're trying to paint and help people get to?
Yeah, I would say f- financial freedom for me is being able to freely live, give, invest like never before with a proper mindset and perspective on who owns it all. And to think of an image of that, I remember when I was teaching these FPU courses and there was a call at our church to help a family in need. And I remember there were a lot of families as I kind of looked around and I looked down at my family and at that time we were living quite frugally. This is probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, but we were trying to really be intentional with our money. And I remember a lot of families looking around that they were like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make ends meet? I remember there was a couple with their three kids that were two rows in front of me. And I remember the look on their face, and it was one of celebration because
Wow.
there was a need in the church and they were excited. And I actually knew this couple fairly well. They had no debt, they had financial peace, and they were able to overwhelmingly bless this family. And there was no fear, there was no restrictions. There was just this openness, this generosity to just bless this family on the spot. And I thought that is financial freedom, that family can do this without even really planning and coordinating. And it's blessing their family to do this. This isn't something that was restrictive and frustrating for them. And that to me is financial freedom.
Wow. Powerful. Man. And that's just something I want too. I mean, when you paint that picture, it's like, how amazing would that be to be in that position,
Yeah.
to be able to give to somebody in need and not have the fear and not hold on to things so tightly. And I think that's been a big thing for me that I've been thinking about a lot of
Mm.
being in that position, changing, um, because to be honest, I've looked at wealth sometimes as almost a bad thing of, um, this is something that people use for their own benefit, and
Yeah.
this makes you arrogant, and this is whatever it is, or you've seen someone with a lot of money make stupid decisions, and And sometimes it can be easy to just say, oh, I'd rather not be rich or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, but I've been thinking a lot about that lately of how amazing would it be to be on the side of the giving side of being able to give generously to make somebody's life better and to not be so worried about the finances. And generosity is such a core value of mine. And it's like I want to be in a place of financial freedom, to be there. And just that picture of the
Yeah.
kids, they're smiling and the family's smiling.
Right.
And what you talked about earlier of how amazing it is to be able to give and to tithe, and how that brings freedom, to be in that position where you have been intentional with your finances throughout your life, to where you can be in that spot then to bless somebody else and to pay it forward,
Yeah.
is a powerful, powerful picture and a vision. And so I just
Yeah,
want.
if there's listeners out there that are looking for a practical guide, and I would say the Bible is the best, of course, but as a believer in Jesus, I would say that. But I would say practically, hey, I want to read a book to get traction on what does giving
Mhm,
look like? What does a blessed life look like?
yes.
Hands down, the best book I've ever read in my life, and I finished it about 2 years ago. I don't know how it took me so long to hear about it, but it is called The Blessed Life by Pastor Robert Morris out of Texas. I feel like, in my humble opinion, it's the best book to lay out giving from a biblical perspective, but
Mhm,
also having a generous heart to be able to have more than just rice and beans. And it's okay to have a little bit extra as long as your heart is correctly focused on the Lord. And
mhm,
so this is a guy who I think to this point's given away 10 cars or 15 cars. He's given
mhm,
away a home. Imagine going to your wife and saying, "Honey, we're called to give our house away." I mean, this is a guy whose heart matches his daddy's heart, his father's heart, right? So if you're looking for a quick practical read, I think I read it in 2 days. I could not put it down because it resonated so much with what I was looking for: a biblically accurate view of finances, but also
mhm.
one that wasn't, I have to be poor in order to be holy. And I think some of us
Right.
growing up in church feel like, being poor is very synonymous with being holy. And I think that's a very dangerous path to go down. And but that book I think could be very helpful for you.
Great resource. Great resource.
Yeah.
Go grab the book. Go grab the book. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dustin. How can we be in support of you? What's going on in your life? How can we help you and best be there for you, for blessing us with your time?
Yeah, I would say just prayers for our business and for our ministry. We try to do a lot of good with the business, and we try to help people. I mean, it's interesting because I get to do what I love to do every day, but we make money from it. It's a business, but I believe wholeheartedly it's a ministry, because we're able to help walk people side by side to help them feel more free with their finances, to give and live like never before. So I would say prayer that we could continue to expand that ministry, to continue to help people,
Mm,
because right now there's a ton of uncertainty in the market. Bond markets are down about 30% year to date. You got stock markets that are getting crushed, war in Ukraine, international unrest. You've got inflation at double digits with no sign of slowing down. You've got all kinds of things happening, a lack of faith in our government. And so
mhm.
there's all this unrest. And what that creates for people is a desire to do nothing. And so I'm constantly trying to push people out of that comfort zone, that while bullets are flying, we need to actually take action. So I would say
Yeah,
prayers, Jonathan, to help influence and help impact more people. Thank you for asking.
of course, of course.
Yeah.
Yep. So please be keep Dustin in your prayers for everything that he's done for us today. I really appreciate your time. So practical, and go grab that book, The Blessed Life, and start planning. Be intentional with your finances. I think that picture that he left us with at the end of financial freedom, have that vision in mind, and
Hmm.
and put yourself in those shoes, and imagine being there. And you can get there. It just takes some intentionality with your finances. And like you said, 30 minutes a week. or 30 minutes a month to plan it
Yeah.
out. Tell your money where it's going to go. Start to budget. Start to attack that debt. Get other great people around you. Get some accountability. You guys can do this. And thanks for laying it out for us, Dustin. Really
My
appreciate
pleasure, man.
you,
Thanks
your
for the invite.
time, your wisdom. Amazing. So thank you, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Intentional Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to support the show, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and leave a rating and review. If you are someone who is looking to take your life to the next level, accelerate your success, and live more intentionally, I would love to help. Shoot me a text at 970-430-6085, and we can schedule a time to meet to discuss your vision and your goals. Again, that is 970-430-6085. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, build a life that matters by living intentionally.